There you go. Enjoy. I'll be here to learn myself. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Janice. So I'm Tom Donovan. I'm the Director of Charitable Trusts at the Attorney General's Office, and love speaking to leadership classes. I've spoken to leadership Mount Washington Valley in the past, and I hope you're finding it to be a worthwhile for all of you early in your careers and in your leadership in the community, or what you have to offer is very important. So I hope this presentation will be helpful to you in that regard. So I'm going to share a screen thing in just a second, and I am open to people interrupting me. I don't know if you have you haven't really been doing Zoom presentations for leadership, but I'm sure you've done more than your share of Zoom meetings. So I have no problem with people going off mute to interrupt me to ask a question. I'm not, I guess you could do the hand raising thing or the chat feature if you wanted to. It may be a little difficult for me to see it if I'm sharing the screen and I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation. So if you want to just,
if chats come through.
The chats come through. Okay, so I can see that. All right, awesome. All right, so hold on, let's hope this goes. All right. Hold on, I got to move this so I can see it. I got this one. I'm just trying to move my cursor. Okay. All right, there you go. How does that look? Is that you seeing everything now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Here's my sales pitch. I'm going to do it at the beginning rather than at the end. Charities need committed volunteer leaders. I hope Leadership Mount Washington Valley has already told you that. The trends are not good, and we see that here in charitable trusts. We have 11,000 charities that do important work in New Hampshire every day. About 6,500 of them are based here in New Hampshire. And we hear complaints about how difficult it is to get board members to serve. And there are a number of reasons for that. People are busy. More couples, both parents work. And so there's just less free time available in the evening. And, and then some people become cynical because of some of the scandals we've had involving some nonprofits. But social capital is what makes our communities work. We've got a number of great communities in the Washington Valley, and you need to spend the time to make it work. And so we want you folks to be leaders in the nonprofit communities, in the nonprofit community, and hopefully this will help you work. And of course, charities need money. And some charities are fortunate because they get a lot of so-called program service revenue. So for instance, if you are an animal welfare organization and you get fees from people who are adopting pets, that's what we call program service revenue. That's great. And a number of charities get government grants. If you're running a child care center and some of the participants are low income, the government may pay for the child care. So those they're very important components for a number of charities, but it's donated revenue that makes a charity great. It makes it different from a business. And directors ought to be involved with fundraising, not only writing a check yourself, making a donation yourself, but also helping out in fundraising events. And there are all sorts of ways that charities need to raise money. The easiest is a direct cash gift. somebody writes a check or, a electronic transfer of funds. Sometimes people leave money in a will or a trust. That's great. Sometimes you do special events with an admission fee. You have a concert or golf tournament, you name it. And then sometimes you have, and this is a more recent developments, crowdfunding and peer-to-peer gifts. And Janice asked me to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to do so because I think it's more interesting. It's there are statistics as to how important it is for charities. It is certainly not the majority of their fundraising, but it is increasing in size year after year. So let's talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into some of the mechanics of duties of directors. All right. So here's the easiest way for a charity to do online giving, is to have a donate button on its website. So you recognize this. This is the website of the Mount Washington Observatory. This screenshot's a little dated, but most all charities have donate buttons.
Tom,
And-
I think we can't see that part of your screen. I think we can only see your
The main
Your
slide, it doesn't seem to be advancing.
You're kidding. You're not on the donate button?
No.
Oh, no, hold on. Let me go
I
back.
think sometimes if you share your screen, you can choose to only share one thing or share anything that's on your screen. So maybe if you reshare it.
You want me to get out and go back in?
Yeah, if you stop sharing and then you could share again by choosing the slides that you're on.
Okay, hold on. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop share. And now you want me to share again. And what do you want me to do? Just share at the moment?
You could choose the screen or the slideshow that you're using. Choose that.
Okay. Well, so you
We
see,
now see the donate button.
what's that?
We now see the page for charity website donate button.
Right, but it's also showing, it's not presenter view.
I think you can choose to just share one thing or you can share anything. I think if you go back again, you can choose to share anything on your screen as opposed to just PowerPoint or just Safari or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so.
It was still a mystery.
Yeah, I haven't had this problem.
I just sent a step-by-step so that we can share it because it is a little confusing. There's a link in the chat.
Oh, all right, yeah, and now I'm. Hold on here, because I am, oh, wait, maybe this is
Michelle,
one.
would it help if you took over the?
So what I did is I am only seeing the slides of people and no longer not the whole Zoom thing. Maybe
Do you want me to share your presentation and then
I
you
could
just
do
tell me when
that.
to-
Yeah, that's like klutzy, but if you want to, sure. But how do you want me? Well, you've got my presentation, right?
I do, but you would have to stop sharing right now so I could then
Yeah,
share
so
my.
I have to, so when I'm in Zoom. Yeah, so my problem is I don't have a slide. So I can't find the in Zoom. Okay, there we go. Meeting control. Speed. Oh, there we go. Okay, stop share. Okay, it's up there. Sorry about that, guys. All right.
All right, fingers
for it.
crossed I get this right. So everybody bear with me for a second. Okay, I'm gonna now
Sorry.
share my screen, so hang on. And I see, Tom, I think I see what's happening too, because when you share your screen,
Yeah.
it kind of freezes what you're trying to do.
Ooh,
So
why would that be?
let's see. Now, can everybody see the one slide from the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna mute myself now, and I'm gonna advance to the donate one.
Okay. It's like 5. So.
Okay, it's not letting me advance.
Oh.
Okay, so let's see. Hang on. I don't know if this will. We'll see how this goes, guys.
Don't press from beginning to back.
No, I'm just gonna leave it here. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Sorry about that, guys. So I don't know what the problem is. Okay. So there you go. There's a donate button. This is Mount Washington Observatory, a local organization. Most every charity has one. And it usually connects to some type of a third-party merchant account. PayPal is big in that space. So is it called Squarespace? There are several organizations that specialize in this. The only risk my experience is that most charities don't raise a lot of money this way. It's easy if you happen to be talking to someone about donating and you think that they're ready to donate now, and you can just tell them, well, go on our website and click and donate. So it's handy that way, but it doesn't drive a lot of donations. There have been some problems. We've had a couple of cases in New Hampshire where people are trying to get access to figure out the credit card number and the CVV number for a credit card, and to do that cheaply. And they use some kind of a bot, and they will go on a charity website because they'll accept a donation as low as $1, and they will try all sorts of combinations of credit card numbers and CVV numbers for $1 donation, and most of them won't connect, but eventually they'll get one to connect and they'll make $1 donation. They might make several $1 donations, and they're doing this to multiple charities at the same time. And it's worth it to them because once they get the CVV number combined with a credit card number, then they can go off and buy more expensive things elsewhere. You're saying, so why should a charity care about this? Well, some merchant banks charge per attempt and to the charity. And so you might be getting charged for that. And we had a charity that got charged like $50,000 as a result of that scam. Now they talked it down with the bank, but that's an issue. I think one way to limit that may be to have a minimum donation of more than $1, $10 or $20 or something like that. Just want to flag that as an issue. Okay, next slide. So I just talked about that. Let's go on to the next one. Stripe is the company I was thinking about, not Square. Okay, then there are other ways for people to give online through third-party platforms. PayPal Giving Fund is one of them. Certainly GoFundMe. GoFundMe has a charity platform that is separate from the regular GoFundMe. Amazon is a type of this, rather Amazon Smiles. And those sites allow a donor to give to any charity on the IRS listed 501c3 organizations. They basically take the entire master file of all IRS charities, and you can give to any one of them. Next slide. What happens here, and this is a little tricky, when you make a donation through these third-party sites, the money doesn't go straight to the charity. These platforms have an intermediary charity, and you make your donation to that charity. It's a donor-advised fund. And these charities have names like Network for Good, PayPal Giving Fund, America Online Giving Foundation, etc. And so if you look at your credit card receipt, if you make such a donation through these intermediaries, you won't see the name of the charity. You'll see the name of the intermediary charity, if you will. So the money gets in first into the charity space, and then it gets relayed from there onto the eventual charity. Next slide. And the reason platforms do this is they don't want to get into trouble in case some of the designated charities, because there are more than 1 million charities that are listed by the IRS. Some of them may be fronts for terrorist organizations or money laundering. And PayPal Giving Fund or Amazon Smiles, they don't want to get into trouble with the feds for funneling money to bad groups. So they need to do some investigation when they get that kind of a donation. So that takes time. And meanwhile, the money has to sit somewhere. And so it sits in these charities that are connected to somehow to the platforms, or they have a contractual relationship with the platform. There's a way to shorten the time frame. Some charities will be encouraged by an outfit like PayPal Giving Fund, et cetera, to enroll with them in advance, and they'll be, in a sense, pre-approved, and they will have a bank account connection, so there can be an electronic transfer. But we've had problems where some people have donated, let's say through PayPal Giving Fund, and it's taken 2 or 3 months for the money to eventually get to the charity, and that's caused some problem. Okay, next slide. Now let's talk about peer-to-peer fundraising. Okay, tell me the truth, folks. How many of you are on Twitch? Anybody? You can just, nobody wants to admit it. So Twitch is a social media platform that its big focus, as far as I can tell, is online gaming. And people watch other people play video games. And some of these people are really good and have followers. And people will spend hours watching these people play video games, and they're entertaining. So what I have for you is a screenshot of a young woman. You see her right there in the corner of the screen, and she's talking as she's playing a video game, and she's just talking about stuff as it goes along. Now, some of these gamers get paid for doing this. They ask for money and they get paid, and that's how they make a living, sitting wherever and doing it. But sometimes they also will raise money for charities. And it's hard to see on this small screen, but you see there's a $50 on the left side below the video screen. So, and you can't, and then to the right of it someplace it says St. Jude. So this woman is trying to raise money for St. Jude, and she's got some kind of a challenge going on for the next hour. And people will give money, and sometimes the video game player will announce, if people give $500 in the next minute, I will have my video game character do a dance on screen, or this, that, or the other thing. And it's very clever. And St. Jude, which is one of the largest charities in the nation, encourages this kind of partnership and is willing to work with it. And they've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars through these kinds of linkages. Now, if you choose to give, and there is some kind of a give button there on that screen, you get moved to a site that is owned by a different company called Tiltify, Tiltify. And why don't we move on to the next screen? And then you make your donation. It's pretty clever. What makes me concerned is sometimes folks, these video game players are mixing requests for donations to support their own lifestyles and also making donations to go to a charity. Now, I think because Tiltify is a responsible company, I think they make sure that the money goes where it's supposed to, but it does create some concern. So that's one type of peer-to-peer fundraising. There are a lot of other ones you see, whether on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. And it is, and sometimes they're created or what I call organically. Somebody just says, like the Ice Bucket Challenge, that just started a few years ago by somebody wanting to support, I guess it was MLS. It was to support some research with respect to some disease. But some savvy charities are encouraging it, peer-to-peer fundraising, and make it easy for them. And there are companies like Fundly and QGive, which provide a template for individuals to use their Facebook accounts or other social media accounts to go raise money. Next slide, please. And here's the potential for this. Traditional crowdfunding is on the left, and it has a limitation on how much you're going to raise. But with peer-to-peer fundraising, you get your friends to pass on the link to your Facebook page, pass on to their friends, etc. And so it creates a multi-tiered approach where you can raise lots and lots of money. Theoretically, these tend to be low-dollar gifts, but it's better than nothing. So anyway, it's interesting. All right, next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but these are some of the issues with crowdfunding and charities. There are a lot of benefits, but there are some problems, and they create problems for us. We worry about fraud, etc. I haven't talked much about GoFundMe. That involves more often fundraising for individuals, the person who needs payment of help with medical bills, as well as for charities. And that can create confusion in the minds. So that's the end of my presentation on the fundraising. If there, I don't see any hands, anything in the chat on that. So if not, let's move on to the part of the presentation where it's a little more nuts and bolts. We're going to talk about what you have to do if you're involved with a charity. So if you are, all charities have three masters, if you will. If you're a corporation, you have to deal with the Secretary of State's office. You have to deal with us, the Attorney General, and you have to deal with the Internal Revenue Service. And no matter where you are on the position on your board, you ought to make sure that your organization is paying attention to these reports. In the case of the IRS and our office, it's annual. In the case of Secretary of State, it's every 5 years. Okay, let's move on. So now I'm going to be talking about fiduciary duties of directors. Now that sounds intimidating, and I'm hoping I'll make it a little easier for you. All directors of charities owe fiduciary duties, and it's our job to enforce them. Charities don't have shareholders for the most part, and you're expected to know your fiduciary duties. Their ignorance is no excuse. So I'm going to focus mainly on the duty of loyalty and the duty of care. Next. Duty of loyalty means organization's interests must come before your personal interests. And most frequently, it gets tested when somebody has a conflict of interest or they have a corporate opportunity, an opportunity that really belongs to the charity, but you decide to take it. And we have a statute that governs it. What I say to folks is when you're, let's pretend this is a Zoom meeting of our board of directors. And when you enter the room or the Zoom meeting, your focus should solely be on what's best for the charity. So if this is a Little League Board of Directors meeting and your child is on the Little League, your interest in that board meeting is not whether Johnny or Sarah gets to be the pitcher next Saturday. Your interest is what is in the best interest of the organization as a whole. You have to be able to separate that. That's not to say the fact that Johnny or Sarah is one day going to be a major league pitcher. That may have motivated you to join the board. But once you're on the board and you're sitting in that meeting, your focus has got to be on the organization as a whole. Next. Now, usually people get themselves into trouble with the duty of loyalty with what is called in New Hampshire a pecuniary benefit. That's just a fancy word for conflict of interest. It's a transaction where a director or a member of the director's family or business or employer has a direct or indirect financial interest. Next. And and there are some exclusions to it. So the executive director's salary, sometimes the executive director serves on the board, that salary is not considered a conflict of interest. Also, if someone gets a benefit that is the equivalent of that is available to a member of the general public. So for instance, if you are on that Little League Board of Directors and Johnny or Sarah is a participant, that's fine, so long as he or she pays the same amount of money if there's like a sign-up fee or something like that. If there is a discounted sign-up fee, it's just for kids of directors, then that could be a pecuniary benefit, right? And then if there was a transaction that started before you got on the board of directors. So let's say you work for New Hampshire Electric Co-op, and then it was getting electricity before you joined the board from them, and it will probably continue after you leave the board. That's not considered. Next. So if there is a pecuniary benefit, it has to be voted on by the non-conflicted members of the board. The conflicted member of the board has to leave the room. The remaining directors have to consider whether it's in the best interest of the organization. In other words, is it an okay price? Is it fair to the organization? And then there has to be a 2/3 vote of the disinterested directors. And that 2/3 vote has to at least be a quorum of the full board of directors. So you have to have at least 50% of them have to have voted on. Now here's the thing. If you've got multiple people with multiple conflicts, they all have to leave the room in that same meeting. And why do you suppose that is? This is difficult with the chat feature. But the reason is, otherwise people might trade off. I'll vote for your conflict if you vote for mine. So to solve that, everybody who's got a conflict in that fiscal year has to leave. But then you don't want to have too many directors with too many conflicts, because then you won't have a quorum left and you won't be able to approve the vote. Okay, next. So if everything I said doesn't apply if the amount of the pecuniary benefit is under $500 in a year. So for instance, if Ben runs a bakery, and Ben, I hope you're still here, and you bring pastries to each of the board meetings, we're back in person now, and the organization pays you for that because they're really good pastries, but it's only $350 a year that you end up getting paid by the organization. We don't care about it. It's not big enough, so we don't care. Okay, next. But if it is over $500 a year, up to $5,000, we do care about it. So that vote I talked about has to take place. And it has to be put in the minutes of the meeting. And then it has to be listed as a pecuniary benefit transaction when you file your annual report with our office. So for instance, if Anna runs a computer shop and the executive director needs a new laptop loaded with software, and she says, I'll sell that to the organization for $2,500. So if you're sitting, rest of the board members, if you're sitting in a meeting, what would you do maybe to, how would you handle it? Anna's computer shop, it wants to sell a computer loaded with, laptop loaded with software to the organization. What do you do? Well, what you might do, and I realize this is difficult here, what you might do with something like that is you probably wouldn't go and get bids. That's not enough money to get bids. But what you might do is go on the web, see what, Best Buy, what you could get it from Best Buy or Apple or whatnot for equivalent. And so you can get a couple of equivalents and find out what it is. And you know what? The executive director did that, found out that, other places you could get it for $33,000, $3,500, $4,000, $4,500. So what Anna's doing is really a discount. So that's a good deal for the organization. And it's pretty much the same hardware and software that's being sold. And you'll find that often your directors are the most generous people to the organization. So this statute allows you to take advantage of that generosity, but you just got to make sure it's in the best interest of the organization. So that's why you have to go through these hoops. So in New Hampshire, we don't prohibit conflict of interest transactions. We just want to make sure that the board does its due diligence. Okay, next. If it's over $5,000, then you got to do all of those things I just mentioned. Plus, you have to send us a letter to that effect, and you have to put a legal notice in the newspaper. So for instance, let's say Alec runs let's say your organization has an office condo and it needs a new heating system and you're responsible for it. And Alec operates a plumbing and heating business. And he says, I can, install heat pumps, I can do this, I can do that. And it only costs $15,000. So what might you do in a case like that if you're the remaining board member? So for something like that, you might get quotes. Yeah, thank you, Alec. Yeah, you want to get quotes for something that large, and you could, right? And again, it might turn out that Alec's bid of $15,000 is really good. The others came in at $18,000 and $20,000. So we say, of course, we go with that. But here's another problem. What if people kind of know that Alec's plumbing and heating business doesn't have a great reputation? So the cheapest price might not be the best, right? And that can be uncomfortable. And that's one of the reasons you want to do it when that person is not in the room. So you can have that discussion saying, yeah, he installed something for me and it didn't work well, and you've heard other things, it's had problems with Better Business Bureau or whatever. So that's the kind of thing you need to consider. That's often the case with professional services. So if you're a CPA or a lawyer on the board and providing services, you may, or public relations, not necessarily, the lowest bidder may not be the best. So you got to consider all of those conditions. Okay. Real estate transactions. If you want to sell that office condo and Carrie wants to buy it, then you got to go through all of these hoops. But guess what? You also have to go to probate court. They require you to go to probate court to get permission if you're going to buy or sell real estate. Next. And whatever you do, don't lend money to a director. If Ben's pastry shop's not doing badly and he asks for a loan, sorry, don't do it. And if you do, you're personally liable. So Ben, just sorry about that. Okay, 24, next slide. And all charities in New Hampshire have to have a conflict of interest policy. It has to be at least as strict as what I've talked about, because that's what the law requires, but it can be even stricter. You could say, we will not do business with any director at all, period, full stop. You might not want to do that because, as I mentioned before, maybe you're passing up some good deals. Anna was willing to sell a laptop for less than the going price. So you just got to think about it. Next. Okay, next. So we've been talking about duty of loyalty. Now we're going to move on to the duty of care. That means you need to pay attention. Act carefully. Next. The biggest problems that we have with the duty of care are dealing with money. So your job is not to run the day-to-day administration of the charity unless it's a really small one. But you do have an obligation to put in place policies, and they're often relating to finances, bank statements, checks, bank cards, handling of cash, that sort of thing. And you should monitor compliance with the charity. And you ought to think carefully about who among the board is going to be the treasurer, because that person would likely spend more time with any staff dealing with money. Next. So the treasurer's got a big responsibility. He or she is the one who would make the presentation at each board meeting, perhaps with working with a finance committee or a CFO if it's larger. And should provide a report at each board meeting and also a budget once a year. Next.
Tom, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
What if a board is so small, or what happens if there's a board member that's not at the board, there's not one person that actually fits a treasurer's role? What would you recommend a board do?
So you can have a finance committee with people who are not on your board. That's one solution. But you really should have at least one person on the board who is savvy enough to be able to fill the role of treasurer. You've got organizations going to have a problem if, I hate to pick on animal welfare charities, but yeah, if everyone is great at knowing about dogs and cats, but doesn't know how to balance a checkbook, you got a problem. Okay.
We won't take offense at that, Tom. We have excellent financial people here at the Conway Area Humane Society.
I know you do.
Yeah.
I know you do. But and I was just but
Yeah, and his name is Rover.
He counts with all four paws, yes.
Yeah, there you go. As long as he doesn't eat the cash. Okay. So the treasurer's report at each meeting, there should be an income statement, a balance sheet, cash flow statement, a fundraising report if you've had an event, because sometimes you find out that you're losing money on your fundraising events. So maybe you should not do them, or do differently. Look at trends. And then you should have a year-end report if you're a larger organization, if you have any audit, the auditor ought to provide a report that will talk about internal controls, and the board ought to meet separately with the auditor. That's only for larger organizations, but that's the auditor works for the board, doesn't work for management. Next. So here are some red flags. If your treasurer, if you're small enough, the treasurer has the checking account, or your CFO, if they become hostile or defensive, they don't provide periodic financial reports, or you know that the person is having difficulty in his or her personal life, that's a problem. I can think of a large organization in the southern part of New Hampshire where it was a person who was, actually it wasn't the CFO, but was somebody in accounts payable. And she got a cancer diagnosis. And it was very sad. She was a younger person. And she decided that life had not treated her fairly. So she started creating fake invoices to a company and that she created, and the checks went to a PO box that she created, and she was cashing the check. And this was a large organization, and it didn't get caught by the auditor. It went on for over 5 years, and she stole about $500,000. So the good news is that her cancer went into remission and things look good. The bad news is after about 5 years, she got caught and she went to jail for it. Not a good situation, but I can tell you that they did make a claim against the auditor. Auditor didn't catch it, and I think they got partially reimbursed in the settlement with the auditor's malpractice. Okay, next.
Thomas, could I just, I want to share a story with the group so that they can see it come right down to their town. In guess it was 1996, the Mount Washington Valley Chamber of Commerce did all those things that you saw we shouldn't do. Like we didn't force the treasurer to test the reports. I was on the board, I was a fairly new board member. By the time we finally got our act together, we realized that we were $160,000 in debt. We had no money in the bank. We had no correct accounts receivable, and we had no correct accounts payable. What happened is that 3 board members stepped up to the plate. I was one of them, and 2 others have passed since then. And we got on the stick figuring out the accounting. And that's what you have to do as a board member. Because the first thing you have to realize is hopefully you have D&O insurance that is going to cover you so that you will not have to pay that back. And we had to call up every account receivable and find out that, no, I don't owe you. And here's the proof that I don't. And we had to call every accounts payable and find out that our accounts payable wasn't correct and we owed more. We called several companies and got forgiveness, which was amazingly gracious of them. The Boston Globe forgave $25,000, but they indicated that the Mount Washington Valley Chamber of Commerce would never be able to buy advertising from the Boston Globe again. It would have to go through a media buyer. That has since ended. We got $65,000 forgiven by Quebecor, which is a print company in Canada. And then we ended up with whatever that difference is that we had to pay off. And we had to, I think we finally got it paid off in like 1998 or what have you. But that was because the board was not watching, and they assumed that the person who at the time was the director was doing everything right, and they didn't take the hints that every month we got told, well, we don't have the financials ready for you this month, we'll have them for you next month. And we were fortunate that we were able to clean that up And now, unfortunately, for my board of directors, at the time I was on the board, they have a lengthy, and Tad can attest to this, they have a lengthy financial report every month. That's not just the balance sheet and then a quick explanation of that. They get it might even be 5-page P&L now that shows them everything we do, as well as profit to budget and profit to comparison of the year before, and at the AR and the balance sheet, so that they know beyond a shadow of doubt where every cent has gone. So this can happen, and it can be scary. And the first thing you want to be sure of is that you have D&O insurance for any board that you sit on, so that your personal assets are not liable for this kind of lack of fiduciary responsibility. And the other thing that is tough to do is when you're on a board that's having trouble, you should pull your checkbook out and write a check and provide that to that organization to help them out. Of course, no amount of helping out $160,000 was going to get us past that. But those are the responsibilities of a board member. And I just wanted to share that with you, that if you're not watching, some pretty hefty things can happen. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Janice. That's a very valuable lesson for all of us. So as I say here, the buck stops with you folks. Yeah, you can get, this is how we see boards. It's usually over money, and that's how they get themselves into trouble. And sometimes we see people abandoning ship when things get bad. And what I tell them is, it's too late. You got to stick up with it, and you've got to see it through. Just because you say you're going to resign doesn't mean I'm going to let you off the hook. If there are meetings that I want to hold, I'm going to make you come to the meeting. So once things, when the going gets tough, it's tough to get going, and people who were on the board need to work through it. Okay, next. So yeah, how can you minimize steps? Nothing is perfect, but a lot of it is just, like most things in life, showing up, pay attention to the finances, ask questions, don't accept excuses. That sounds like that was a problem in Janice's case, that there were repeated excuses why reports weren't ready at monthly meeting. Next. You know what the bobble-head is, like this? And I've served on a lot of boards, and I'm sure a number of you are beginning to as well. It's a Tuesday night, it's February, it's cold, it's you're in the Mount Washington Valley. You either want to get home to watch, I don't know, the Bruins or Dancing with the Stars or something. The last place you want to do is be hammering out this issue about whether or not you should deal with this particular problem. And so the temptation is just to say yes, yes, yes to whatever the executive director wants. That's not the way to handle it. Ask questions, get engaged. This is the most important work, and can be most satisfying work. But you've got to ask questions, and you can disagree without being disagreeable. Okay, next. So the last thing, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this is the duty of obedience. If you're fortunate enough to get donations that are restricted, somebody wants to leave money for endowment or to build a new building, you have an obligation to respect that restriction. Unless the donor is willing to release it, you must hold on to it for that purpose only. And that's one of the core missions of our organization, is to make sure that the donor's intent is honored. And you can get into trouble as a board when, let's say, you're having a tough year and you you know, that so-and-so left money in her will 10 years ago in trust, the income only to be used, you know, for your general support. And you're saying, the heck with just the income, let's take the principal, let's take everything. So you can't do that. And if you do, you could be personally liable. And if you have questions, we can help you answer that. And there are, it's more complicated. Next. Okay, let's talk briefly on best practices. Next. So we think that it's a good idea for new directors in the organization to be great if they could get an orientation tour of the facilities, if they have one, introduce staff. It'd be great if there's a manual that would have a copy of the Articles of Agreement, the bylaws, mission statement, in the latest annual report. And some organizations have what they call a director agreement, which is interesting. It's not a binding agreement, but it may say, you know, we expect that you will show up for all but maybe one meeting a year, that you will either give or get a certain amount of money every year for the organization, and that you'll serve on a committee or two, and other expectations of what you'll do as a board member. I don't know if anybody's been in an organization that has that. I've been on some that do, but it's just to create some expectation. Next. This is a much lengthier topic. Directors are there to govern. They're not, the staff is there to manage. And we have problems where sometimes the board is overly involved and they try to micromanage the executive director. That will drive an executive director crazy and they'll eventually leave. Or the board abdicates this responsibility and lets the executive director do everything. Sometimes the executive director is more than happy to do that. And the board becomes just a figurehead, and the executive director can manipulate them because they don't want to spend the time and the effort. So either way is not good. So you have to find the happy medium. Again, the board creates policies and delegates it to the executive director and staff to adopt them. And the one person whom the board hires, fires, and evaluates is the executive director. So take that responsibility seriously. Next. We're almost done. All right, director immunity. After all these terrible things I've been telling you about your responsibilities, you're going to say, why would I ever join the board of directors? Well, the good news is you do have a good amount of immunity by statute. You can also add some immunity in your Articles of Agreement. It basically depends on good faith, no wanton or willful negligence, etc. And as Janice said, director and officer insurance. It's a really small organization like youth sports, you probably can't afford it, but organizations of any substance ought to have director and officer insurance. The most important part of that is you're probably not going to owe any money, but you'd have to hire a lawyer to defend yourself, and the insurance will pay for the lawyer. Next. Now, volunteers. Number of charities run with volunteers. I'm sure the Humane Society has them. They also have immunity, but the organization has to go through certain hoops to make that happen. They should have a record of who is a volunteer, and that the volunteer is acting within the scope of his or her service. So if you've got volunteers at the Humane Society who are there to clean out the kennels and walk the dogs, and the next thing you know, you see one of them who's maybe wants to go to veterinary school and is going to do surgery or something like that, that's not a good idea. Or if it's a conservation organization, they're doing their annual trail cleanup, you hand them shovels and rakes. And the next thing you know, one of them brought his or her own chainsaw and is cutting down trees. That's not within the scope of of the service unless that was set up in advance and you feel comfortable that the person has those skills. Now, for some reason, this immunity doesn't apply to driving people, volunteers driving people around, or to having meetings at their houses. I think the theory of that is people should have car insurance, and they ought to have homeowners insurance, and so likely they'll be protected. Okay, next. All right, bylaw basics. So the bylaws are like your operating manual. Organizations have articles of agreement up here. It's like their constitution. It says what your purpose is, what happens if you're dissolved. Very high level things. The details are in your bylaws. And you ought to take a look at your bylaws. They ought to be reviewed every 5 years or so. Try to get a lawyer on your board and put them to work looking at the bylaws. That's the sort of thing. I'm a lawyer, I can say this. You know, that's a way to keep the lawyer out of trouble and also can do something good for your organization. And a lot of it is pretty tedious work. So, but you want to keep them up to date. You know, it may say in the bylaws that you've got committees for this and that, and you've never, in fact, had committees for this and that. So you ought to keep. One thing we recommend: don't adopt Robert's Rules of Order in your bylaws. That's a trap. Unless you're going to have a parliamentarian who understands Robert's Rules of Order, you're going to screw it up. You're not going to do it right. And this really happened to an organization in Nashua. They had an executive director who had been there too long. It was time for that executive director to move on, and the board gave him severance and let him go. The problem is their bylaws said that they had to follow Robert's Rules of Order, and they didn't. And the executive director knew that, and he sued. And there was a nasty court fight about that because they didn't follow Robert's rules in terms of how to do the meetings and the notice and all that. So you just need to have pretty basic due process, you know, a motion, second, etc. That's good. You probably someone who's been on the board understands how to do that. Next. Again, keep your bylaws current. Send us a copy of your bylaws. A lot of organizations lose them. So we're pack rats here. So if you send us a copy, we'll keep it in our files. And always put the date of your latest amendment on it so you know which is the correct version. And I think that's it. Next. There are a lot of good resources for nonprofits. We're a big fan of the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits. That's a trade association for charities here in New Hampshire, based in Concord. And membership dues are based on a sliding scale based on the size of the organization. And they also have some free stuff on their website, like sample bylaws, checklist policies, HR policies, et cetera. Some of it is behind the paywall, only for members, but it's really good. Next. And that's how you can reach me. And our assistant director is Diane Quinlan. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know I've gone over my time, but we were technologically challenged.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Donovan? Okay.
I'll ask a question.
Tad?
Hey, Tom, so this is it's not connected to the shelter at all, but I am familiar with a board that is in the past that oversees a municipal organization. It's not like a select board, that sort of thing. It's another form of a board.
Mm-hmm.
How does that vary from regular nonprofit board service in any way?
Yes. So, you know, with a municipality, they often have what I call ad hoc committees, and they really are advisory, and the buck stops with the select board, et cetera. So I don't think they have any duties as such. There are some other municipal boards that have duties. Obviously, school boards do. There's towns have trustees of trust funds. They owe fiduciary dues. Cemetery trustees, et cetera. But if it's what I would call an ad hoc committee, they do not.
So if you're appointed versus elected, is that probably a good distinction or?
Not 100%, but a pretty good distinction. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Good. Thank you.
I would like to also suggest that if you are serving on a board or you are asked to serve on a board, you ask that nonprofit if they have a job description for a board member, if they have a board orientation, if they say no to both of those and you have not agreed yet, then stay away. If they say no to those and you're on a board, then you will probably get assigned to the task of creating the board orientation manual. And if you would like to see what one looks like, we have one here for the Chamber of Commerce. And yes, it can be arduous to begin with, but it's so important if you want board members to actually be working board members and not just bobbleheads.
Mhm.
I had another question too. Tom, some of the boards I've served on have had term limits or length of board terms. Others haven't. Does the Attorney General's office have guidance or an opinion on that?
Good question. Term limits for board members. We don't have guidance, and it's up to the organization to decide whether or not to do them. I personally think it is a good idea. And I'll tell you why. It is hard to kick an ineffective board member off the board at the end of a term. So if you've got, let's say 3-year terms, and the person's been on the board 2 3-year terms, maybe the person doesn't show up much, is a nice person, prominent in the community, maybe just wants it on his or her resume, say I'm on this board, it makes the person feel good, but the person's not doing any work. That person really shouldn't be on the board. The person is holding up an open spot that somebody who could, and just looking at Liam could take that slot and do a good job. So I think the person ought to get off, but you know what? People may feel reluctant to say, sir, you're not going to be renominated for another term because you get to know people, et cetera, and it's difficult. So a term limit is an easy way to say, Joe, we love you, you're great, but we got these darn term limits, you're gone. The other thing that you can do, and I've seen organizations do, is if somebody is really valuable and you have term limits, you can have the person take a break for a year. And if after a year's break, the person you're saying, we need to get that person back. You can always get the person back in a year's time. So that's my personal view. Some organizations have other thoughts of it. You can also create a separate category if some of these folks who aren't doing a lot of work, but they're long-term donors and you want to keep the connection, you can create an honorary group. You can give them a title. You can call them, if the board is called directors, you can call them trustees. You can call them, titans. You can call them whatever you want. Give them a nice title. Let them come to the annual meeting. Maybe, give them additional access and make sure you ask them for a check each year and et cetera. So there are other ways you can show appreciation to folks without keeping them on.
Is that word trustee? So that doesn't have a legal meaning. I see that sometimes. So
Right.
The duty would just be spelled out in the bylaws for what it means.
Yeah. So yes, and that's a very good question. So I tend to use the term director because that's in the statute. Some organizations use the term trustee. I think that's a more traditional term for like hospitals and whatnot. It means the same thing, but there's one exception to that. If an organization is organized as a trust or a true trust, those organizations have legally the people who run them are trustees. Most nonprofits are corporations, and so technically the board is a board of directors. Trustees are technically people who are the trustees of a trust, which is a different type of organization.
Thank you.
Tom, one last question. If you are serving on a board, or you are aware of a board that is not following their bylaws, is not producing from their mission statement, what can a person who is seeing this do to alert the charitable division to maybe check into it?
Oh, so we've got a website, and we got a phone number, and it was on the last screen there. We get anonymous phone calls, or we get not so anonymous contacts all the time, and we look into we certainly look into these, and sometimes we find that there really is a problem. Occasionally, it can be just a unhappy director or former employee. Sometimes we get people who have they're just unhappy, and we recognize that people may have agendas. So, but we'll look into it. So please do contact. Oh, we got another question.
I was wondering if you had an opinion on the average size of a board and or effective size of boards here in New Hampshire.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. What's the best size of a board? And there's literature on that. And I think the view is getting to be smaller boards are better than larger. In New Hampshire, for corporations, nonprofit corporations, you have to have a minimum of 5. The statute wrote into it that you can apply to me. I mean, they don't use my name, but they say the director of charitable trust can grant waivers. Well, I don't like to grant waivers because I think 5 is a minimum. But I think these boards, they have 40 board members. There's a nonprofit college in New Hampshire that has like 40 board members. And I'm thinking, what are you thinking? Well, the answer is they've got a lot of rich alumni with big egos that they want to keep getting big donations from. So I understand all of that. But I've said to them, why don't you create something that sounds important, Titan, something like that, I don't know, and put them all on that, and then have a board of, I don't know, 15 to 20 that does the real work. I think it just gets to be too large. But I don't have as between a board of 9 or 15 or 19, I think to some extent it depends on the size of the organization. A larger organization maybe makes sense to have a somewhat larger board because you may want to have multiple committees and you need more members because you'd want a finance committee. You might want a fundraising committee. You might want a governance committee or a recruiting committee. So you'd need more board members to staff different committees.
I have a question. I am curious what your thoughts are about tiebreakers for boards of even numbers with votes. I haven't experienced it personally, but it's something that I've thought about. Like,
yeah,
is there a rule, or is it just per board?
Yeah, no, there is no rule. It's probably better to have an odd number of directors rather than an even number, but you can never predict because one person may be absent from a meeting, and so you could end up with a tie. And I don't know, somebody may know this better. I think a tie doesn't win. Right? Yeah, Ted says yes. So you need one more. And I I guess one thing is to have it come back to the next meeting when the additional person is there, but I mean, I don't see many tie vote problems. Sometimes the problem is the opposite. Everything is unanimous. That's more likely to be the issue. I mean, it's okay for one or two people to disagree.
We had a tie vote recently. We have an even number of board members. So we just had to treat it like a no.
Yeah.
It wasn't a majority yes, so it's a no.
And you may want to think about how important it is. And, you know, most matters only require a majority vote. But if something is that evenly divided and it's an important vote, do you want to go forward with it? Don't you want to get a supermajority, even if the bylaws don't require it? And normally, there are only a few things that bylaws may require a supermajority vote. Typically, it's to amend the bylaws and maybe a couple of other things. I wouldn't recommend putting supermajority requirements in the bylaws for a lot of stuff. But I think if you can't get a pretty good consensus on, at least on important matters, you know, if the vote is, you know, do we have the annual meeting in May or June and it's a close vote? Yeah, whatever. But it's whether whether you're going to embark on building a building, you probably want more than a tie vote.
Can, Tom, can executive directors be a voting member of the board?
Boy, you're the second person that's asked that of me today. The answer is yes. And we see it, the executive director can be a voting member. The executive director, sometimes we find that they're a non-voting member, ex officio by non-voting members, and sometimes they're not a member at all. I am told that some organizations that have contracts with Department of Health and Human Services for certain types of activities, like in the mental health or substance use disorder field, that they have a rule that does not allow the executive director to be on the board of directors. Then you have to follow that, but I'm not going to tell DHHS about that. But that I think to me, that's intruding too much on the internal affairs of a corporation for DHHS to say that. But they've got that rule.
Okay, anything else? I think the most important thing to take away today is that sitting on a board is not all fun and games. That there is a responsibility, and there is a responsibility that you could be held accountable for, and that it's important to understand the bylaws of your organization and to have Tom's phone number handy, and to dissent, to be willing to be the odd man out around the table and get the reputation for being a pain in the neck. But in the long run, it is the best for the organization. You're there for the organization. You are not there for yourself or any of your buddies around the table.
Right.
So any last questions or last comments?
Janice, you had said graduation and the date, and what I remembered was not what shows in the calendar. So could you say the date for me again?
Annual meeting, Megan, I'm hoping to do it during the annual meeting. I don't have my calendar up, but I believe it's maybe the last Tuesday. It's not near Halloween. It's like the 23rd.
October 26th.
26th. Okay. So I think that's what we'll do, because you all certainly deserve a little bit of recognition for your efforts. And the best way we can do it, considering COVID, is to just plan on doing it at the annual meeting, where we know we'll have a nice crowd of members to thank you for attending and grab you for a board seat somewhere. I know that if If you are interested, I know the Montessori school is looking for board members. And I've put all of the leadership graduates, which you'll go up there eventually, are on the leadership website at mtwashingtonvalley.org. So if people need board members, that's a great place to look for potential.
Also, one shameless plug is that the organization that we fundraised for, which is the Stay MWV Student Debt Relief, the application is open and that goes until June 1st. And so if anyone here has any student debt that they are working towards and combating living locally and all the things, I'm personally a recipient of it, and it was a big game changer for me. Honestly, a couple of years after receiving it is when I've noticed the biggest difference, and I really appreciate it. And so I know everyone works here really hard. And so if you yourself or someone that you know wants to apply, I can send the information, or it's on the website.
Oh, Megan, it's Ashley. I actually did apply. Do you know when we'll hear an answer?
So applications come in on June 1st. We meet at the end of June because we give everyone time. Everyone reads all of the applications and then we come together. So I want to say it's the last week of June that we'll meet, and then we usually email that following week. So I would say by July. But that is not confirmed. Let me confirm with Jess when they would announce. I would assume it would be in July, because we try to get it to you as soon as possible because interest counts every month.
And let me suggest that since you all don't have the responsibility of the fundraising that normally comes with the class because of COVID, if you can find, even if it's just $5 in your personal funds and send it to Stay MWV here at the Chamber, PO Box 2300, to add to that fund, that would be a very fiduciary behavior.
We also have a Give Butter account, which I'm not sure, Tom, if that's one of the ones that you mentioned before, that you can donate electronically online too. So I can send that information to the group.
Okay.
Janice, there was a question in the chat. Denise was wondering if students cannot attend in person at the annual meeting, is there going to be a remote option? And I also had a question about fundraising. There's the opportunity of maybe doing a silent auction for leadership if they were interested, or something that they might be able to do. So I thought I'd put that out there.
I think I'm going to sign off now.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Thank you,
So
everybody.
the remote question, I would put that to Miss Michelle, because she's the one who's got that expertise, and we'll see. That's a good point, Denise. Denise is moving to Texas, so I can understand that you might very much like to be a part of it.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I will be moving to Texas. I'm here in the next month, so I'll be attending the rest of the sessions here remotely, but I would love to still be able to participate in any capacity that I can. So yeah, I'll just look to hear about how that would work. So thank you.
Denise, stay in touch when you move, because if where we have the annual meeting is not able to handle, like, say, a big screen or anything like that, we could still connect you, even if it's like with an iPad or something that we do that connects you, gives you FaceTime.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, very good. All right, well, with that, I'll end the meeting, and thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the Humane Society for attending, and you'll hear from me for the next one.
Thank you.
Janice. Bye, everyone.